I've learned that I get more done when I work with myself, with my own preferences and proclivities whenever I can. Welcome back to the 50/50 Project, where each week I talk through an item on a list made up of one thing I've learned for each year I've lived. So this week we circle back to the work category. And the thing about the work category is that it might be the area of life that is the hardest for us to control and customize, because we're working for other people according to their recommendations and rules, and often in an atmosphere that we can't really shape. I do think, though, that things are becoming more malleable for some people, though certainly not all. For me, anyway, the workplace has changed dramatically since the pandemic, and my job has shifted from a 5-day-per-week in-office job to a 4-day-per-week work-from-home situation, and I am incredibly grateful for that. And I'm lucky, and I'm acutely aware that not everybody has that much flexibility, and some people wouldn't really want it. No one situation works best for everybody. But even in jobs where I've had more guidelines and less flexibility around the way I work, I knew that the more I could tweak the circumstances to fit me, the more productive I seemed to be. Which brings me to thing number 23, work with yourself, as opposed to working against yourself, that is, at least to the extent that you reasonably can. I think in some ways this is a career-centered offshoot of episode number 15, which was called Be You. And if you remember, I talked a lot about how much I enjoy a boring-ass vacation instead of a breathless multi-continent trip. So while that was about knowing and honoring your own preferences in your own time, I think this is an extension of this idea into the time that you lease out to your employer. And when I was thinking about that customization of that idea to the workplace, I kept coming back to 3 ideas that have really helped me over the years. And the first one is really down to scheduling. For me, it helps to know the round of my own days, the patterns that I sort of automatically fall into. And maybe other people don't have as strong of a recurring pattern as I do day after day, but I would imagine that most of us do follow some kind of general round. And maybe the best way to explain what I mean by that is just to run through my own pattern for an average workday. So for me, the first 3 hours of the workday are the best ones for getting into a complex task or working independently in deep concentration, or doing something generative like writing or solving a specific problem or prototyping something new or working on a new ad campaign, anything like that. So things like that are focused and generative, and they're best tackled for me in the morning hours whenever possible, when I seem to have the most of that kind of energy. Then, after those 3 or 4 first hours, I typically need a break, I reset, I do something away from the desk. I usually take a standing call with 2 of my coworkers at around 11 a.m., and then I have lunch. Then in the afternoon, things tend to sort of flip around for me. In the mornings, I fire up my brain and squeeze solutions or deliverables out of it, pushing work from the inside out, sort of. But later, I'm better at taking in information or the ideas of other people. And after lunch, I tend to research or read or look at work done by other folks and respond to that. I like to take meetings later in the day, and then frequently, some of that new information and those new perspectives seep into my brain and sort of percolate there overnight. And then they very often will inform and shape the next day's round of individual internal work. So that's just my own natural pattern. That's what works best for me. Now, obviously, that's not how every day goes, because I'm working with a lot of other people who have complicated schedules and patterns of their own. And it can't always be all about me and how I want to work and when. So if someone wants an early morning meeting, of course, there are times that I just need to suck it up and take that meeting. Nobody dies and the stars don't fall from the skies. But whenever possible, it's just much more productive and frankly pleasant for me to follow my own natural flow. So whenever possible, I consciously try to do that when I'm working on my own calendar. Your round of the day might look completely different from that. You might like morning meetings to get them out of the way so you can focus uninterrupted for the second half of the day. I know people who need to mix things up in blocks throughout the day. And of course, a lot of folks have their schedule just set for them by their employees or their clients. And I get that it's not always within our control. But I think if we're aware of our own patterns, we might be able to shift some things ever so slightly to make things easier for us. Okay, so in addition to thinking about when I'm doing stuff, I have found that it can be really helpful for me to try to stay consciously attuned to how I'm impacted by what I'm doing, and by being aware of which kinds of tasks and work really rev me up and which kind of wear me down. A few years ago, I read a book called Designing Your Life, which was written by a couple of Stanford professors who were both product designers and engineers. And they wrote about ways to kind of functionally optimize your work life. And the thing I remember most from that book was this idea that we can map and quantify happiness and energy as that ebbs and flows over the course of our days. And the way I just put that sounds a little woo-hoo maybe, but really, they just meant that if we can pay better attention to what gives us energy and enthusiasm and what bleeds us dry, we can adjust our days to make our patterns more productive. In particular, it's good to know what kinds of work gets you into a flow state. And I can't resist also recommending a book that's just called Flow, with a subtitle I don't remember, that is also a great examination of the flow state. So I'll put that in the show notes when I find the subtitle. Anyway, the nutshell version is that flow is that state we get into when we're really into a task, and we get so absorbed that we step into an absorption and an inspiration, and we kind of lose track of time. And we also lose any sense of obligation or irritation about the work we're doing and the time we're investing. It's hard to describe flow maybe, but I think we all sort of know what that means on a gut level. If you paint or you do needlework or you build furniture or run track and field or even get really into a spreadsheet that you're working in, and you're just doing the thing effortlessly and effectively and even joyfully, you've felt flow, right? And the point made by these Stanford professors is that the more of our working lives that we can spend in flow, the better we work and the better we feel about our jobs. And that makes a lot of sense to me. But I guess what surprised me about the book is that it calls out how anesthetized we sometimes get to working in the opposite of flow, which I personally would call slog. And we all know what that feels like too. It's that exhausting process of dragging ourselves through a task that we do not want to do and that we get no satisfaction from. And if we can be more aware of what kind of work gives us energy versus what kind of work bleeds us dry, we can at least try to build a workday that leads us more into flow than into slog. Or we can at least break up the slog so that it's not one long one all day, every day. But you have to be able to pinpoint where your own personal pain points are, because they aren't the same for everybody. I know someone who loves flying through financial stats in Excel. I personally would hate that, but they truly, truly love it. I love wrestling with problems, which can wear other people out. Some of my colleagues like starting up a new program with a fresh, clean slate, but that's my least favorite point in a program, that blank starting point. So the point is we're all very different. And my work life is better now that I know where I'm drained and where I'm filled up. Now that I know I'm drained by client calls and energized by team meetings and drained by pitch meetings, but energized by making an ad prototype. That doesn't mean I can always be on a team call instead of a client call, but it does help me stack up my days in ways that are more fulfilling and less exhausting. The reality is we can't just do what gives us joy and blow off everything else that wears us down. And we cannot delegate the shitty parts of our job. And I'm actually a big believer in doing your own shit work. That's an ethical directive. Do your own shit work. But if we carry an awareness of where the flow and the joy is in our work, I think we can, day by day and year by year, start to shape our role around what we like. And that can benefit everybody, because very often that is where we're best anyway. So our employer ends up getting more of our strengths as a bonus. Now, sometimes you're just in a job that doesn't really allow you to shift much at all. And I have been in a position like that many times and may well be again. Sometimes there are aspects of a job that I've enjoyed and aspects that I absolutely dreaded. And while I couldn't opt in or out of all of these situations, I did figure out that I could sort of zone out a little bit during the arduous parts and engage more mentally and emotionally in the great parts. It didn't work every time, and it didn't miraculously turn that job into my favorite job ever. But I think being aware of what was painful and what could be joyful did help me figure out when to lean in and when to just kind of plow through. Okay, finally, I'll just say that I've learned that there are lots of tools and methods to getting work done, and that whenever possible, it just makes sense for me to use the ones that I have a natural affinity for, and to sidestep the ones that I don't and that feel like they add another layer of work to the task at hand. And I've just got some quick and simple examples of that. I get more out of handwritten notes than I do out of typewritten ones. The act of writing things out actually inscribes that information in my brain in a way that typing on my laptop doesn't. And I rarely, if ever, need to refer back to handwritten notes because I have that information encoded in my brain. It's there if I need it, but I usually don't. So I just take handwritten notes, even though a lot of my colleagues type theirs out. That's a pure personal preference. It's not hurting anybody else or interfering with anyone else's work either way. So I choose to do what works best for me. Similarly, sometimes when I'm struggling to focus, I can use the Pomodoro method, which, really boiling it down, it's a 20-minute timer basically, and just doing some no excuses barreling through that block of time. I use an old school ticky-tacky egg timer instead of my phone because I find that the noise keeps me continually attuned to the urgency of the task. Other people might find that distracting or irritating, but it's what works for me. And I'm working alone, and I'm not bothering anybody else, so I do it. When I really need to focus, and I know no one has any particular urgent need for me, I'll sometimes put a note on the calendar and just go D&D on Teams, because the pinging and the dinging break my concentration and, frankly, piss me off sometimes. So these are little kinds of adaptations and customizations where we can take some of the tools we use and make them work better for us. While turning off notifications for an hour, it's not going to solve everything. But it might help tick down my level of distraction a little bit or tick up my power of concentration a notch or two. And every little bit helps on a long Monday or during a deadline rush. So overall, I guess I'm saying that it has been helpful for me to remember over the years that I can shape some of the aspects of the environment in which I work and the ways in which I do it. Work can be a huge part of our lives, and it can also feel like the part of life that we have way too little control over. And there have certainly been times that I've felt disempowered in various workplaces, and that's a really hard situation to be in. But I've also found, at least in the decent workplaces I've been in, that there were ways to lean into my own strengths instead of trying to force every single one of my personal preferences into some kind of general office mold. I no longer try to beat every fiber of my personality and my style into submission when I work. I try now to figure out how to get more of what I want and need. And while, of course, we can't expect it to be all about us in the workplace, I think the younger version of me didn't make enough of the tweaks that wouldn't have hurt or bothered anybody else and would have really helped me. And now that I'm older and hopefully wiser, I know that the more I can tweak my environment, the better I work and the better my work is. And I'll also say that I think the generations that have followed mine are maybe a little bit more proficient at that. And I think that only helps everybody. Okay, so that's about enough of that for today. I wish you lots of flow and very little slog. And I thank you for spending some time with me today. I'll be back next week with thing number 24.